Hi, this is the second episode of Cases of the Four Courts, which is serious about 19th century cases which took place in the Four Courts in Dublin. And the case I want to talk about today is the case of Travers and Wilde. The gentleman behind me was neither a party nor a witness to the case, but he was central to it. And if you think he looks familiar, you're right, he was the father of Oscar Wilde. So he was Sir William Wilde, who was a physician in Dublin in the mid-19th century. So what was the case of Travers and Wilde about? Well, you can see a letter behind me. It might be a bit small to read properly, but I'll tell you what's in it. It was a letter that was written by Lady Wilde, who was the defendant in the case, to Mary Josephine Travers' father. So Mary Josephine Travers was the plaintiff, and Lady Wilde, the person who brought the libel action, and Lady Wilde had written this letter to her father, Mary Josephine's father, and this was the reason for the libel action. So the libel was contained, or the alleged libel was contained in this letter. So what did the letter say? So it said that Mary Josephine had been harassing the Wilde family, that she had been doing this in order to extort money from them, and that these attempts to extort money were not going to be successful. So the libelous element in the letter was the statement it contained that Mary Josephine had been attempting to extort money from the Wilde family, which was a crime and would be defamatory under the law then and now. So the action took place at the Four Courts. This is just an image of the Four Courts from the 1860s, as it would have been at the time. And as with all civil actions, it commenced with an opening statement by the counsel for the plaintiff. And the counsel for the plaintiff in this case was a gentleman known as Sergeant Armstrong. So we have here an image of Sergeant Armstrong. He had his own issues. Not long after this trial, he began to suffer from mental health difficulties, which he subsequently overcame. But at the time of the trial, he was one of the leading counsel in Ireland. And Sergeant Armstrong's opening statement, first of all, he set out the letter from Lady Wilde. He said it's clearly defamatory because it contains an assertion that Miss Travers has been seeking to extort money. And then he went on to open the wider background of the relationship between Miss Travers and the Wilde family, which was explosive. So at the time of the case, Mary Josephine Travers was about 25, and she had been attending Sir William Wilde as a patient for a number of years previously. So this is an image here of the Wilde's beautiful mansion in Merrion Square. Sir William's consulting rooms were within it, and the family also lived there, which would have been usual for physicians of the time. And Mary Josephine, in her interactions with Sir William, after a while, he began to behave towards her in a peculiar way. He began to comment on her clothes, to say he'd buy her new dresses. He was so insistent that he'd buy her a new dress that he actually tore the dress she had on her, so that he said she'd have to buy a new dress now with the money he gave her. He also lent her money. He invited her to events, and then he would say his wife, or infer that his wife was jealous she had been invited to these events by him. He visited her home, and he said it wasn't fit for her to live in and she should be looked after properly. He said that her sister was much better dressed than she was and she wasn't being looked after by her family, and again she should allow someone to look after her properly. So I think we all know where Sir William was leading. But what happened next was that much more serious, and that was that when Miss Travers came to him, she alleged that when she visited his consulting rooms on one particular for her awful occasion, that he insisted on examining a burn on her neck, that he took off her bonnet, and then she said something too gross to discuss happened, and she became unconscious. She was asked had she been chloroformed, and she said no, but it was too awful to talk about. And then when she woke up, Sir William was bending over her. He had a handkerchief. He threw the handkerchief in in the fire, and he said that's the end of that. And then he called himself a ruffian. So on this account, I think people after hearing that were thinking, particularly having regard to the letters that Sir William had definitely written, which had been read out in court, I think people were thinking that Sir William certainly had made some kind of a sexual assault on her, and even if he hadn't, that he was a bit of a cad for writing those letters. So that was the background as set out by Miss Travers' counsel, Sergeant Armstrong. He was setting it out, he said, to explain the context to the letter. Sir William had been lending Miss Travers money, and she had got loans from him, most of which she had paid back, but there was no question of her extorting money, her counsel said. And this was again repeated by Miss Travers in evidence that he had lent her money. She hadn't really liked taking it, but she needed the money, and she had paid it back as soon as she could. There was still some money owing, but she certainly hadn't been extorting money from him. She didn't want to do that. So I think she was quite believable in relation to that. Her evidence came across as quite sincere on the extortion point. However, when Edward Sullivan, counselled for Lady Wilde, started to cross-examine Miss Travers about her subsequent behaviour with the pamphlets, she became somewhat less sympathetic. So so I mentioned the pamphlets. Miss Travers had continued to be friends with the Wilde family, and indeed to attend Sir William for some time after the alleged assault. But during that time, she was covertly trying to get revenge on him, as she called it, and she used to do things like put garlic in his office and so forth. But then matters escalated, because Miss Travers was also a member of the Dublin literary set, as indeed was Lady Wilde. And she published a review of a book by Lady Wilde, which was very uncomplimentary, and I think the Wildes were quite upset by that, because, you know, certainly Lady Wilde viewed her as a family friend. But the next step that Miss Travers took, possibly assisted by other people on the Dublin literary scene, was she prepared a pamphlet about a doctor called Dr. Quilf, who chloroformed his female patients and assaulted them. And she distributed that for sale, together with a little note that Dr. Quilp was Sir William Wilde. And she started turning up at events that Sir William was speaking at and distributing the pamphlets at those events, and also getting newsboys to hold up placards with statements about Sir William on them. So this was going on all over Dublin. And I think matters came to a head when she turned up at the Wilde house, got in the door, because remember, she was a family friend, and began to give the pamphlets to the Wilde children. And I think that's what upset Lady Wilde so much. And obviously she looked for an explanation from Sir William. Maybe he said she's extorting money from me. Maybe Lady Wilde believed her, maybe she didn't. Maybe Sir William wrote the letter. That was suggested in court, that they'd written it together. But in any event, that was what led to this letter with the libelous statement in it being sent to Miss Travers' father. So after Miss Travers gave her evidence, Lady Wilde was the next witness. And the difficulty Lady Wilde had was that although she could certainly give evidence about the distress and upset caused by Miss Travers' behaviour, she couldn't really support her allegation of extortion of money, because that was not what the correspondence between Sir William and Miss Travers bore out. Even the correspondence after the alleged assault, it did not show any extortion of money on the part of Miss Travers. So that part of the libel could not be justified. And when you make a statement about someone that's libelous, you have to justify that in order to avoid having damages for libel awarded against you. You have to prove that that it is true. And Lady Wilde couldn't do that. So what happened was that the jury awarded the jury found in favour of Miss Travers that she had been libelled and that Lady Wilde had failed to justify the libel, but the jury only awarded Miss Travers a farthing damages. So that was the background to the famous case of Travers and